You're listening to Audiology. Support our work on Patreon and be sure to submit your requests for topics in the comments below. When European explorers landed in Florida in the early 1500s, the number of the state's original indigenous people started to drop sharply. This decline was mainly because the Native Americans were not immune to new diseases brought over from Europe. On top of this, the Spanish crushed any attempts by the natives to revolt, which further reduced their numbers in northern Florida until the early 1600s. Around that time, the Spanish set up a bunch of missions which helped improve relations and stabilize the population. However, by the late 17th century, things took a turn for the worse again. This time, British settlers from the Carolina colony and their Native American allies launched raids that caused another significant decrease in the indigenous population. Between 170 to 12,000 Native Americans were captured as slaves. By 1710, observers mentioned that North Florida was pretty much empty of its native inhabitants. The Spanish missions had to close down because there was no one left to run them for. The few Native Americans who survived either moved west to Pensacola and beyond, or east near St. Augustine. When Spain handed Florida over to Great Britain in 1763 as part of the Treaty of Paris, most of Florida's Native Americans left with the Spanish for Cuba or New Spain. In the 1700s, various groups from Native American tribes in the southeastern United States started settling in the empty lands of Florida. Among them were the Yamasee in 1715, who joined the Spanish in Florida after conflicts with Carolina colonists. Creek people from Georgia, including both Lower and Upper Creek, moved into the area too. The Miccosukee tribe, speaking Hitchiti, chose the area around present-day Lake Miccosukee near Tallahassee. They have kept their identity alive through the Miccosukee tribe of today. Another group of Hitchiti speakers, led by a figure known as Cowkeeper, made their home in what we now call Alachua County. This area, once known for its Spanish cattle ranches in the 17th century, got its name Alachua Prairie from one of those ranches, La Chua. The Spanish in St. Augustine labeled the Alachua Creek people Cimarrones, meaning wild ones or runaways, marking the start of the use of Seminole to describe various groups, even though these communities still saw themselves as part of distinct tribes. The area was also home to Choctaw Yuchi, so-called Spanish Indians believed to be descendants of the Calusas, and Rancho Indians from Spanish-Cuban fishing camps. In 1738, under Governor Manuel de Montiano, the Spanish established Fort Mose as a haven for African and African-American fugitives, offering them freedom and land. Many came from Pensacola, seeking refuge from slavery. The Spanish enlisted some of these former slaves into militias defending Pensacola and Fort Mose. Others found new lives among the Seminole, becoming integral parts of the tribe through marriage, language, and culture. They brought farming skills, acted as interpreters, and some even emerged as significant leaders, known as Black Seminoles. When the Spanish left Florida for Cuba in 1763, many from Fort Mose left with them, but some stayed, living with or near Indian bands. Escaped slaves from the Carolinas and Georgia kept heading to Florida, drawn to a southern escape route on the Underground Railroad. Those who joined the Seminoles became deeply involved in tribal life, cementing the legacy of the Black Seminoles as vital members and leaders within the Seminole community. During the American Revolutionary War, the British, who were in charge of Florida, called on the Seminoles to launch attacks on settlements in Georgia that were allied with the Patriots. This chaotic period also allowed American slaves to flee to Florida, where they were offered freedom by the British in return for their military service. These actions made the Seminoles adversaries of the newly formed United States. When the Revolutionary War ended in 1783 with a treaty, Florida was handed back to Spain. Spain's hold on Florida was rather weak, as it only had small military posts in St. Augustine, St. Mark's, and Pensacola. Spain couldn't effectively control the border with the United States or deal with the creation of the state of Muskogee in 1799, which aimed at being a sovereign nation for American Indians, separate from both Spain and the U.S., until 1803 when Spain and the U.S. jointly deceived its leader. Seminole groups, including Miccosukee, stayed in towns just inside the U.S. border, while American settlers began moving into Spanish territory in Florida. The British had split Florida into East and West Florida back in 1763, a division that Spain kept when they took Florida back in 1783. West Florida stretched from the Apalachicola River all the way to the Mississippi River, With their control over Louisiana, too, Spain had dominion over the lower parts of all the rivers draining the western side of the Appalachian Mountains in the U.S., blocking American access for transport and trade along the lower Mississippi. The U.S. had big reasons for wanting to take over Florida. Not only did it dream of expanding west of the Appalachians and securing unrestricted commerce on the western rivers, but it also wanted to prevent Florida from being a launching pad for any potential European invasion of the U.S. The United States was eager to secure a port along the Gulf of Mexico for safe access. American diplomats in Europe received instructions to attempt the purchase of the Isle of Orleans and West Florida from their current owner. Amid these efforts in 1803, when Robert Livingston went to France to discuss buying the Isle of Orleans, France surprised the Americans by offering not just the Isle but all of Louisiana instead. Although the proposal went beyond their original mission, Livingston, along with James Monroe, who had joined to assist in the negotiation, argued that the region from the Mississippi to the Perdido River in the east was part of Louisiana. In the Treaty for the Louisiana Purchase in 1803, France included a statement exactly matching Article 3 from its 1800 treaty with Spain, formally transferring France and Spain's rights over the territory to the United States. This particular part of the treaty was open to interpretation, a fact that James Monroe used to the United States' advantage. He took a broad view of the treaty's wording, suggesting that Spain considered West Florida as part of Louisiana since 1783, and that other clauses supported this viewpoint, aiming to secure United States rights. Monroe firmly believed that France had not removed any part of Louisiana from its control up until 1762, dismissing the later formal handover date to Spain in 1769. President Thomas Jefferson initially thought the Louisiana Purchase included West Florida and strengthened the United States' claim to Texas. However, after consulting with United States officials in the border region who doubted West Florida was included and contemplating the matter himself, Jefferson later seemed to acknowledge that West Florida wasn't part of the United States territory. During negotiations with France, envoy Robert Livingston wrote multiple reports to United States Secretary of State James Madison, indicating that West Florida wasn't under French control. France, in response to Livingston's claims, stated that the United States had no basis for claiming West Florida. Following unsuccessful negotiation efforts with Spain for the territory in 1804 and 1805, Madison and Monroe were prepared to forego the claim to West Florida. Furthermore, the United States had ambitions to acquire more of the Gulf Coast, planning to either purchase or negotiate for the remaining parts of West Florida and all of East Florida. Instead of a direct purchase, it proposed to assume Spanish debts to American citizens as a swap for the territories. However, these plans got more complicated in 1808 when Napoleon invaded Spain, which led to the fear in the United States of potential British military bases in the Floridas during this tumultuous time for Spain, threatening the security of the United States' southern frontier. By 1810, the Peninsular War had left Spain in a tight spot, with its army spread thin and French forces taking over much of the country. This chaos spilled over into Spain's American colonies, sparking rebellions. Over in the region of West Florida and the neighboring Mississippi Territory, the settlers began plotting in the summer of 1810. They aimed to take control of Mobile and Pensacola, two strategic locations, the latter not even claimed by the U.S. at the time. In the westernmost part of West Florida, between the Mississippi and Pearl Rivers, locals gathered in Baton Rouge during the summer of 1810. They were worried about keeping the peace and stopping the area from falling under French control. Initially, they tried setting up a local government still pledging loyalty to Spain's Ferdinand VII. However, when they found out the Spanish governor called for military help to quell what he called an insurrection, the Baton Rouge district residents took matters into their own hands. On September 23rd, they ousted the Spanish authorities by capturing their fort in Baton Rouge. 3 days later, they declared West Florida's independence. In this newfound republic, opinions quickly divided into pro-Spanish, pro-American, and pro-independence camps. The pro-American group reached out to the U.S. for annexation and financial support. U.S. President James Madison, seizing the opportunity, announced on October 27, 1810, the U.S.'s intention to claim West Florida, from the Mississippi to the Perdido River, leaning on a shaky interpretation of the Louisiana Purchase Agreement. Madison sent William C. Claiborne, the governor of the territory of Orleans, to officially take over. Claiborne marched into St. Francisville on December 6, 1810, and Baton Rouge 4 days later. Despite resistance from the West Florida government, which preferred negotiation over outright annexation, Governor Fulwar Skipwith defiantly claimed he'd die defending their flag. Nonetheless, Claiborne didn't acknowledge West Florida's government as legitimate, and eventually Skipwith and his legislature caved to Madison's declaration. Claiborne then occupied only the area west of the Pearl River, marking today's eastern boundary of Louisiana. Governor Juan Vicente Fulci Juan of West Florida, aiming to dodge a military conflict, eliminated import taxes on American goods in Mobile, and even proposed surrendering all of West Florida to the U.S. if no aid or directives came from Havana or Veracruz by year's end, with fears mounting that France might conquer all of Spain, which could lead its colonies to either fall under French control or be grabbed by the British. President Madison, in January 1811, pressed Congress to let the U.S. take temporary possession of any territory next to the U.S. east of the Perdido River. This area included the rest of West Florida and all of East Florida, to block any foreign power other than Spain from taking control. Congress quietly passed this resolution on January 15, 1811, allowing the secrecy of this decision to extend till March 1812 if needed. By 1811, American forces had taken most of the Spanish territory from the Pearl to Perdido rivers, except for Mobile, which fell into U.S. hands in 1813. Lastly, when Governor Vicente Fulci backed out of his deal to hand over the remainder of West Florida to the U.S., Madison sent George Matthews to handle the situation. Following a failed attempt to negotiate in East Florida, Matthews, stretching his instructions to their limit, attempted to provoke a rebellion similar to that in Baton Rouge. Back in 1812, President James Madison gave General George Matthews a mission: approach the Spanish governor of East Florida and try to secure the territory for the United States. Matthews was told to only take control if he could arrange it peacefully with local leaders or if another country invaded. However, since most people living in East Florida were pretty content with how things were, Matthews ended up gathering a group of volunteers from Georgia, promising them arms and protection. On March 16, 1812, this group, known as the Patriots, together with support from 9 U.S. Navy gunboats, took over the town of Fernandina on Amelia Island, which lies south of the Georgia border and about 50 miles north of St. Augustine. The day after seizing Fernandina, the Patriots and the town's Spanish leaders signed a deal of surrender. Then U.S. troops were brought over, and the Patriots handed Fernandina to General Matthews, who quickly raised the U.S. flag there. This maneuver gave the United States control of the coastline all the way to St. Augustine. As they marched toward St. Augustine, the Patriots, with a mix of U.S. Army troops and volunteers from Georgia, would briefly claim land, raise their flag, and then hand it over to the American forces, who replaced it with the U.S. flag. Witnesses noted that the Patriots couldn't have advanced or maintained their positions without the U.S. military's support. Despite their cooperation, they failed to capture Castillo de San Marcos in St. Augustine. When the U.S. government learned about these actions, there was immediate concern about a potential war with Spain, leading to General Matthews being dismissed on May 9 by Secretary of State James Monroe, since the conditions for taking possession weren't met as instructed. Even so, peace talks with Spain dragged on. During this time, U.S. and Patriot forces resorted to looting almost every plantation and farm in the area, leaving devastation in their wake by May 1813. Amidst these events, General Matthews had a meeting in June 1812 with Seminole leaders, including King Payne, hoping they would stay neutral in the conflict. The governor of East Florida tried to get the Seminoles on the Spanish side, while the Seminoles themselves were divided, comparing their treatment unfavorably to when the British controlled Florida. Despite the Spanish governor's efforts, the Seminoles, including some who spoke for peace and others who didn't, mainly kept out of the fight, though they were upset over Spanish rule. The black community living outside St. Augustine, many of whom were escaped slaves, sided more openly with the defense of St. Augustine, fearing the loss of their freedom if the United States took control. However, tensions escalated, leading to a threat from Patriot Army leaders against the Seminoles, pushing those favoring war to act. In retaliation for Seminole raids, Colonel Daniel Noonan and later Lieutenant Colonel Thomas Adams Smith led raids into Seminole lands, both ending with limited success and significant losses. By May 6, 1813, after ongoing negotiations, The U.S. troops left Fernandina, lowering the American flag and withdrawing back to Georgia, marking an end to this aggressive attempt to secure Florida. After the United States government pulled support from East Florida, shifting troops and ships out of Spanish domains, many of the American patriots in the area either retreated to Georgia or took Spain's offer of amnesty. However, some still harbored dreams of staking a claim in Florida. Among these was Buckner Harris, a key figure in recruiting for the Patriot Army, and once the president of the Legislative Council of East Florida. Leading a small group, Harris and his followers became known for intimidating residents who had accepted Spanish pardons. Hoping to establish a new American foothold, Harris envisioned creating a settlement in Alachua country, relying on financial backing from Georgia, a land deal with the Seminoles, and a Spanish land grant. He reached out to Georgia's governor, suggesting that an American presence in Alachua would deter Seminoles from the Georgia frontier and capture runaway slaves. Yet Georgia cited a lack of funds. Efforts to negotiate land from the Seminoles and Spain also fell flat. In January 1814, Harris and 70 men crossed into East Florida from Georgia, aiming for Alachua country. Their numbers swelled to over 90 by the time they reached the charred remains of Payne's Town. There they constructed a 25-foot square two-story blockhouse, dubbing it Fort Mitchell in honor of David Mitchell, a former Georgia governor and supporter of their cause. By the completion of Fort Mitchell, the group's ranks had grown to over 160 men. On January 25, 1814, they declared the formation of the District of Alachua of the Republic of East Florida, appointing Harris as director. The council called on the United States Congress to recognize Alachua as a United States territory, a plea backed by 106 self-styled citizens. The settlers began farming and community life took root, highlighted by the birth of a child in March. But Harris's ambition to further Americanize the Alachua country led him into danger. On a solitary exploration in May, Harris was ambushed and killed by Seminoles. His death marked the beginning of the end for the District of Alachua. Fort Mitchell was deserted within a fortnight. However, the story didn't end there for all. After Florida became a part of the United States in 1821, some of Fort Mitchell's settlers returned to Alachua country to plant new roots in what was once the ambitious project of Buckner Harris. Thanks for watching. Share your thoughts in the comments and subscribe for more content.